The galaxy had been at peace for 6,000 years. Not the kind of peace that comes from kindness, not the kind that grows from trust or friendship between different peoples. It was the kind of peace that comes from fear, the kind that is held in place by an iron fist so large and so powerful that no one dares to raise their voice, let alone a weapon. The Galactic Concord was that iron fist. It was a union of more than 400 alien species. It stretched across 3 full spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy. It had warships beyond counting. It had weapons that could crack a moon in half. It had laws written over thousands of years. And it had soldiers, billions of them, sworn to enforce those laws without question or mercy. For 6,000 years, the Galactic Concord had been the highest power in the known galaxy. There had been rebellions, yes. There had been small uprisings on distant worlds. There had been pirates and smugglers and border disputes between member species. But no one, not a single civilization in the recorded history of the Concord, had ever stood against the full might of the Empire and survived to speak of it. The Concord liked it that way. The Senate, which governed all 400 member species, sat on a planet called Vel Prime. It was a beautiful world, all golden plains and deep blue oceans, with a capital city that stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Towers of pale stone rose into the clouds. Ships moved through the sky like schools of fish in the sea. The streets were filled with beings of every shape and color and size, all of them living under the protection of the most powerful government the galaxy had ever seen. On the outer edges of conquered space, there was a region called the Outer Veil. It was a cold and mostly empty stretch of the galaxy, a place of dead stars and broken asteroid fields, and long stretches of dark space where nothing interesting ever happened. The Concord had sensor stations out there, staffed by low-ranking soldiers who spent most of their time doing very little. It was considered a punishment posting. If you did something wrong in the Concord military, they sent you to the Outer Veil. Sensor Station Keth 7 was one of the most boring postings in the entire Outer Veil. It sat on a small rock of a moon orbiting a dead brown dwarf star. There were 12 soldiers stationed there at any given time. They monitored deep space. They filed reports that nobody read. They ate their meals in silence and counted the days until their rotation ended. The soldier on duty the night everything changed was a young Seafit named Soville. The Seafit were a reptilian species, gray-green skin, large golden eyes, long, thin fingers built for delicate work. Soville was 23 years old by Concord Standard Time. He had been stationed at Keth 7 for 8 months. He had filed 242 sensor reports in that time, and not a single one had contained anything worth noting. He was eating a cold meal and staring at his sensor screen when the reading appeared. At first, he thought it was a malfunction. The sensor showed an object moving through deep space, approximately 60 light hours outside the Outer Veil boundary. That in itself was not unusual. Space was full of objects, comets, asteroids, old dead satellites from species that no longer existed. But what made Soville set down his food and lean forward was not the object itself, it was the speed. The object was moving faster than anything Soville had ever seen on a sensor screen. Not faster in a way that could be explained by a standard hyperdrive. Hyperdrive travel was a technology every species in the Concord used. It folded space around a ship, allowing it to cross vast distances in short amounts of time. But this object was not folding space. There was no hyperspace signature, no fold wave, no the usual trails that a ship in jump travel left behind. This object was simply moving, burning through normal space at a speed that should have been physically impossible. Soville checked the sensor calibration. He ran a diagnostic. He checked it again. The reading was real. He pulled up the energy signature of the object. That was when the cold crept into his chest. The energy coming off that object was enormous. It was not the clean, efficient energy of a Concord vessel running on standard power. It was raw and hot and almost violent in the way it burned. The object was pouring energy into its engines the way a dying star pours light into space, without care, without economy, without any concern for how much it was using. Whatever was out there, it was burning bright and it was coming fast. Sauville filed an alert report. He marked it high priority, the first high priority report he had filed in 8 months. Then he sat back in his chair and watched the sensor screen and felt the hair on the back of his neck, such as it was, being a CFIT, standing up. The report reached Outer Vale Command within the hour. The duty officer at command was a Dominion officer named Sub-Commander Heleth. The Dominion was the most powerful species within the Conquered, large blue-skinned beings with 4 arms and a long history of military dominance. Heleth had been a soldier for 30 years. He had seen a great many things. He looked at Sauville's report and frowned. Then he looked at it again. He pulled up the sensor data directly. He compared it against every known ship classification in the Conquered database. He ran the energy signature against a library of over 2,000 recorded alien propulsion systems. He found nothing that matched. The database returned a single result labeled unknown, anomalous, no match found. Heleth sent a message up the chain of command. He did not mark it urgent. He marked it urgent. By the time the message reached Admiral Command at the Outer Vale Regional Headquarters, the object had crossed 2 more light hours. It had not slowed. It had not changed course. It was moving in a straight line directly toward Conquered space, as if it knew exactly where it was going and had no interest in hiding the fact. Admiral Command dispatched 3 scout cruisers. The scout cruisers were fast, lightly armed ships designed for exactly this kind of situation, an unidentified object in deep space that needed to be identified and, if necessary, turned away. The 3 cruisers moved in formation. Their commanders were experienced officers. They had intercepted unknown signals before. This was routine, or so they told themselves. The lead cruiser, the KCS Verath, reached sensor range of the object first. The commander of the Verath, a veteran Cree officer named Captain Orland, looked at his tactical screen and felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt afraid. The object was a ship. That much was clear now that they were close enough to see it directly on visual sensors. But it was unlike any ship Orland had ever seen. It was enormous, not in the way that Conquered capital ships were enormous, with clean geometric lines and carefully designed hull sections. This ship looked like it had been built and then rebuilt again, over and over across a very long time. The hull was covered in patches and welds and repairs. Great scars ran along its sides, marks of impacts and burns that spoke of battles Orland couldn't even imagine. Parts of it looked almost ancient. Other parts looked newer, added on, as if the ship had grown over centuries. And it was burning. Not on fire, but its engines were pouring energy at a level that made the Verath sensors scream with overflow warnings. The light coming off the ship's engine ports was the blue-white of something working beyond its designed limits. And yet, the ship did not break apart. It held together. It moved forward. It was not slowing down. Orland hailed the ship on all standard frequencies. He transmitted the Conquered Standard Challenge Code, a signal that every registered vessel in Conquered space was required to respond to. He sent it 7 times on 7 different bands. No response. He ordered the Verath to move into the ship's path, a standard intercept maneuver, placing his vessel directly ahead of the incoming object to force it to either stop or change course. The Verath's navigator had barely finished the maneuver when the proximity alarm went off. The unknown ship had not slowed, had not turned, had not acknowledged them at all. It was simply continuing on its path. Orland gave the order to emergency boost out of the way. The Verath's engines screamed. The ship lurched sideways. It was not fast enough. The unknown ship passed within 200 kilometers of the Verath at full speed. The shockwave hit like a physical wall. The Verath was thrown end over end, its systems flaring and dying and rebooting in rapid sequence. Orland was slammed against his harness so hard his vision went dark for several seconds. When he could see again, his bridge was full of smoke and sparks, and every screen was showing damage readouts in urgent red. The Verath had survived, but barely. It was dead in space, drifting, systems struggling to come back online. The second cruiser, the KCS Drath, reported that it had been flipped completely over by the shockwave and had lost all primary propulsion. It was slowly spinning in the void. The third cruiser did not report at all. Orland later found out that the KCS Orvin had been directly in the ship's path and had not gotten out of the way in time. The shockwave had hit it dead on. There were no survivors. One cruiser destroyed, 2 heavily damaged, 312 conquered soldiers dead. Not from a weapon, from a shockwave, from the wake of a ship that hadn't even noticed them. The report that reached Outer Vale Command 20 minutes later was not marked urgent. There was a classification above. 12,000 warships opened up simultaneously. The combined fire was extraordinary. Energy beams, mass driver projectiles, torpedo spreads from hundreds of launch tubes, focused plasma lances from Dominion dreadnoughts. It all converged on the unknown vessel in a single massive salvo. A wall of destruction that lit up that region of space brighter than the dead star nearby. The impact was spectacular. The sensors lit up with readings. The tactical screens showed energy readings off the scale. Velcroth waited for the confirmation of destruction. It did not come. The sensor readings settled. The light faded. The tactical screens recalibrated. The ship was still there, exactly where it had been. Exactly the same, not drifting, not damaged, not listing to one side. Its hull showed no new damage. Its energy readings had barely changed. It sat in the void like a mountain sits on the ground, utterly unmoved by what had just been thrown at it. Not a single shield flickered, not a single visible impact mark from the most powerful simultaneous weapons discharge in conquered military history. The command bridge of Velcroth's flagship was absolutely silent for a very long 3 seconds. Then every communication channel opened at once. The voice that came through was calm. It was human-sounding, not harsh, not mechanical, not alien in the way that Velcroth had expected a truly foreign species to sound. It was a plain, even voice, speaking first in Dominion Standard, and then within the same breath in the native language of every species whose ship was within range. It said, "That was a mistake. You fired first. We want that clearly understood. You fired first, and we did not return fire. We are recording everything. Every species in this fleet will be able to verify what happened here. You fired on a vessel that had done nothing except communicate with you." A pause. When the voice returned, it was still calm. That calm was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. "We are going to give you one chance to correct this mistake. We are not asking you to surrender. We are not asking you to retreat. We are asking you to stop, think about what you just did, and decide whether you want to continue down this road. Because we have been patient for a very long time. We have been waiting for this conversation for longer than your Senate has had living members. We did not come here to fight you." Another pause. "But we are very, very good at it. So think carefully before you fire again." The channel closed. Velcroth sat in his chair and said nothing. Around him, his officers were perfectly still. No one moved, no one spoke. The Outer Gale Defense Fleet, 12,000 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy, sat in formation around a single vessel that had absorbed their full fire without a scratch. And the universe felt in that moment just slightly different than it had before. Smaller somehow. It was not a feeling Velcroth was used to. It was not a feeling any conquered officer was used to. For 6,000 years, the universe had felt like something the conquered owned, like something they controlled, like something that would bend to their will, because everything had always bent to their will. This ship was not bending. Velcroth looked at the sensor screen at the single point of mass sitting perfectly still in the bed star system. Then he looked at the communications officer. "Get me the Senate," he said. His voice was steady. He had been a soldier for too long to let it shake. But his hands, underneath the arms of his command chair, where nobody could see them, were pressed flat against his legs, because if he didn't press them flat, they would shake too. The Senate session that followed was the longest in conquered history. It went on for 14 hours without a break. By the end of it, the chamber smelled of stress and cold food, and the biological byproducts of 400 species sitting too close together for too long. Tempers had broken and been rebuilt and broken again. There had been 2 separate incidents where senators from different species had to be physically separated by the chamber guards. But in the end, a decision was made. The conquered would treat the situation as an act of war. The unknown vessel, which the military had begun referring to simply as Target 1 in their reports, because nobody liked to say, "the ship we couldn't damage," out loud, would be engaged with the full force available until it was destroyed or forced to surrender. At the same time, a secondary fleet would be dispatched to the coordinates of the planet called Earth to assess whatever civilization existed there and determine the extent of the threat. The session was archived and sealed under the highest classification. What happened next? The conquered would later spend a great deal of time trying to explain away as something other than what it was. They would use words like tactical maneuver and strategic engagement in their official reports. They would describe it as a complex and sophisticated military operation. The truth was simpler. The truth was that the conquered attacked something it didn't understand and couldn't hurt. And what followed was 9 days of the most complete and humbling military defeat any power in the galaxy had ever suffered. It began on the morning of the 2nd day after the fleet had first opened fire. Target 1, which the crew of the vessel had by then identified by name during several more broadcasts, the ship was called UNSV Prometheus, the letters standing for United Nations Space Vessel, names that meant nothing to conquered intelligence at the time, began to move. It moved slowly at first, not with the terrifying speed it had shown coming in through the outer veil. It drifted out of the dead star system and into the outer edge of the assembled fleet. Velcroth ordered another full-firing salvo. The 12,000 ships discharged again. The Prometheus absorbed it like it absorbed everything else. Then it moved between the ships. This was what made the commanders in the fleet begin to feel something beyond simple fear. The Prometheus did not rush. It did not burn through the fleet at the terrible speed it had shown entering conquered space. It moved at a relatively moderate pace, fast but not impossibly so. What it did as it moved was precise, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. It targeted systems, not ships. As the Prometheus moved through the assembled fleet, it fired, not the massive energy weapons that conquered warships used, which were designed to punch through hull plating and destroy engines and kill crew. The weapons the Prometheus used were different. They were focused, narrow, precisely aimed at specific parts of specific ships. A beam would reach out and strike an engine array, not the whole engine, just the primary coupling. Another would hit a weapons system's power feed. Another would trace across the sensor array of a dreadnought with surgical accuracy, leaving the hull completely intact, but rendering the ship blind. Ship after ship in the fleet found itself suddenly unable to move, or unable to fire, or unable to see, but not destroyed. The crew was untouched. Life support was untouched. The ships were still there, still full of living soldiers. They just couldn't do anything anymore. Word spread through the fleet quickly. The Prometheus wasn't killing anyone. It was disabling ships. The realization produced 2 very different reactions depending on where in the fleet you were receiving the information. Among the Dominion officers and the other inter-species commanders, the ones who held the most power within the conquered, the reaction was fury. Disabling ships instead of destroying them felt like mockery. It felt like being looked at with contempt. It felt like being shown very clearly that your enemy could kill you if they wanted, and has simply chosen not to. Among the smaller species, the Vreth, the Keth, the Sarath, the dozen or so civilizations who had been conquered members for centuries, but had always sat at the lower end of the Senate's power structure, their reaction was different. They watched a vessel absorb the full fire of 12,000 warships without a scratch, and then respond by disabling enemy ships with the care of a surgeon rather than the destruction of a killer. They started thinking. On the 3rd day, the Prometheus broadcast another message. This one was not directed at Velcroth or the Senate. It was broadcast on every frequency to every ship in the fleet and carried clearly to conquered relay stations deep inside the Empire's borders. Millions of beings on dozens of worlds received the broadcast simultaneously. It was not a threatening message. It was a statement of facts. The Prometheus crew listed one by one what they had done since the engagement began. They named each ship they had disabled. They described exactly what systems they had targeted and what they had left intact. They stated clearly and repeatedly that no conquered personnel had been killed since the initial engagement. The deaths of the scout cruiser's crew were acknowledged and described as an accident caused by the Prometheus not anticipating the ships being so close to its path at high speed. Then they released the archive file, the 30,000-year-old survey log from conquered exploration vessel KS-3301 Alpha, the one that had documented the planet Earth, rated it low development, no strategic value, and never gone back. Every being in the fleet heard it. Every sensor operator and navigator and gun crew member and junior officer heard the survey team's own voices describing a small blue world and its early civilization and marking it as non-important and moving on. And then they heard the Prometheus crew speaking calmly and without anger, explain what had happened to that small blue world in the 3,000 years since it had been forgotten. The smaller species in the fleet began talking to each other. On the fourth day, something happened that Velcroth had not prepared for, had not predicted, and would later describe as the moment he understood that the situation was no longer recoverable. New ships appeared in conquered space. They did not come through any sensor-monitored region. They did not emerge from hyperspace at the known jump points or fold entry corridors that conquered navigation charted and watched. They appeared from unexpected places, behind the dark side of moons, from inside dense asteroid fields, from regions of space that conquered sensors had read as empty. The first ship to appear was detected by a routine patrol vessel near the GE Nebula deep inside conquered space. The patrol vessel challenged the new contact. The response came in the same calm, clear manner as the Prometheus. The ship identified as the UNSV Endurance. It was not hostile. It was simply there, sitting in conquered space with its transponder broadcasting openly. Within 6 hours, 40 more ships had appeared, not clustered together, but spread across a vast section of conquered space. Each of them had emerged from a... They had poisoned portions of their own planet badly enough to shift the climate. They had survived plagues. They had faced the kind of internal conflicts that split civilizations at their roots, dividing peoples against each other along lines of culture and belief and resource. They had multiple times across multiple centuries come very close to the edge of their own extinction. And they had always come back. They had pulled themselves from the edge of each crisis, not through luck, but through what one human historian, writing for the document release, described as the characteristic stubbornness of a species that has never once in its entire evolutionary history been willing to accept that something is impossible. They had reached space on their own, without guidance, without help, without any of the technological sharing that conquered member species gave to each other. They had built their first generation of spacecraft from scratch, through trial and error and disaster and learning and trying again. Their first missions beyond their own world had been slow and fragile and dangerous. Dozens of early astronauts, as they called their space travelers, had died in the process. They had kept going anyway. Then, roughly 800 years before the Prometheus arrived at the outer veil, a deep space survey team had found something unexpected near the edge of humanity's solar system. Caught in the gravitational wake of a wandering dwarf planet was a piece of ancient technology. Not human technology, but alien. Very old. A deep space relay station. Automated, long since depleted of power, but with its data storage intact. The station was conquered technology from the same era as the survey vessel Case 3301 Alpha. The data recovered from the station took decades to decrypt. Human linguists and historians worked on it for generations, but eventually they cracked it, language by language. And what they found inside was not just one survey log, it was a partial map of the galaxy, records of hundreds of civilizations, notes from thousands of years of conquered exploration, a window into a galaxy that was enormously, almost incomprehensibly populated, and that had looked at humanity and decided they weren't worth stopping for. The decision that followed was not made in a single meeting. It was not the decision of one leader or one generation. It was a conversation that humanity had with itself over several hundred years. They knew they were not alone. They knew that out there, in a galaxy full of civilizations, an empire of 400 species had the ability to appear above their world without warning and do anything it wished. They knew that they had been seen and dismissed, which meant they could be seen again at any time by anyone, and the next visitor might not be as indifferent as the survey team. They had two choices. The first was to announce themselves, broadcast a signal, invite contact, step into the galactic community openly, and see what happened. This option was debated extensively. It was ultimately set aside not out of fear exactly, but out of a specific and carefully reasoned concern. Humanity had read the conquered records. They had studied the history of the empire that surrounded their solar system without knowing it. They had seen the pattern. Species that were discovered before they were strong enough to negotiate from any position of strength were absorbed, diminished, or made into dependent members of a structure not built with them in mind. They had no interest in being absorbed. The second choice was to prepare, to grow quietly, to develop without drawing attention, to use the knowledge from the relay station to learn everything they possibly could about the galaxy around them before taking a single step into it, to be patient and to be ready before they were visible. They chose patience. The ships had come first, a fleet built over generations, each vessel designed with technology that pulled from everything humanity had learned, both from its own research and from the slow, careful analysis of conquered technical records recovered from the relay station. Human engineers pushed hard. They had no trade partners, no species to buy technology from, no shortcut available to them. What they built from their own knowledge, and because of that, it was genuinely theirs. Not a copy, not an approximation, but the result of human minds approaching problems that the conquered had solved one way and finding, in many cases, completely different ways to solve them. Better ways, in some cases. The shields that had absorbed 12,000 warships firing simultaneously were one example. The propulsion system that had let the Prometheus cross conquered space in the time it did was another. These were not stolen technologies. They were human technologies, grown from human science, shaped by human necessity. The necessity of a species that had no backup option and therefore could not afford to accept good enough when better was achievable. Then came the intelligence operation. The ships that had hidden throughout conquered space had been placed over a period of nearly 30 years, moving quietly and carefully, using a technique that exploited a gap in conquered sensor technology that human engineers had identified from the recovered records. The ships had run cold and silent, using minimal power, staying in positions chosen specifically because conquered patrol routes avoided them. They had not all gone in at once, that would have been detectable. They had gone in ones and twos across decades, slipping into position and going still and waiting. By the time the Prometheus crossed the outer veil, humanity had been inside conquered space for 30 decades. The 9-day engagement the crew explained in their release documents had been planned for, not hoped for, planned for. The response to the ceasefire request was 4 minutes because the text was already written and had been waiting to be sent. The conference room aboard the Prometheus, with its custom chairs and the teth broth and the carefully prepared food from every delegation member's homeworld, had been set up weeks before the ship crossed into conquered space, because the people who planned the mission calculated that a ceasefire and negotiation was the most probable outcome if the initial engagement was handled correctly. Correctly meant don't kill anyone, don't destroy anything that can't be replaced, be impossible to beat, but don't punish them for trying. Let the smaller species see what you're doing. Let the empire's own internal tensions do some of the work. Make it clear that you could end the conversation any time you chose to, but that what you actually want is a conversation. It worked exactly as planned. The document releases and the slow spread of the story through the conquered populations had effects that the Senate had not anticipated and could not contain. Among the Dominion and the other interspecies, the powerful ones who had run the Concord for millennia, the reaction was predominantly one of deeply uncomfortable reassessment. They fired first. Their own records confirmed it. The Prometheus's records confirmed it. Every sensor log from every ship in the fleet confirmed it. The most powerful military in the galaxy had opened fire on a vessel that had done nothing except communicate. And the vessel had absorbed the attack without harm and responded not with destruction, but with precision, restraint, and documentation. They could not make the story go away. They could not frame it as a victory. They could not file it away in a deep archive the way they had filed away the survey log of a small blue world 3,000 years ago. Among the smaller conquered species, the ones who had always sat at the lower end of the Senate's power, who had always benefited from the conquered's protection, but never quite been equal partners in it, the reaction was something else entirely. It was quiet, and it was strong, and it showed up in Senate voting patterns over the following years in ways that the Dominion found increasingly frustrating. Humanity had done something that no species inside the Conquered had ever been able to do. They had demonstrated in front of the entire galaxy that the Dominion was not invincible. Not because they had defeated it in the traditional sense, no worlds burned, no fleets annihilated, no surrender demanded, but because they had stood in front of the most powerful military in the galaxy and it had broken itself against them. And in the aftermath, the stories and the records and the honest accounting of what had happened were out in the open where everyone could see. That changed things, quietly, slowly, in ways that would take years to fully measure, but it changed them. 6 months after the signing, Ambassador Yara Chin traveled to Vale Prime. She was given quarters in the Senate district, modest rooms that she reportedly expressed satisfaction with. She attended a series of formal introductory sessions with Senate officials from various species, was briefed on Concord procedures, and was shown to her assigned workspace in the Senate building. On the morning of her first formal session as a seated member, she arrived early. She sat in Humanity's designated seat, a new seat added to the chamber's outermost ring, and she looked around the room. The chamber was filling, slowly. Senators arrived in small groups, found their seats, spoke to colleagues. Many of them looked at her. Some looked with hostility, some with curiosity, some, particularly from the smaller species, with expressions she recognized as something approaching the way you look at someone who did something you long wish someone would do. The session chair called the chamber to order. The formal greeting to a new member, as prescribed by Concord